to the templates which one has seen before, would you say this is a substantial like improvement, an improvement on the past ones which we've seen and all that?
Through you, Mr. Commissioner, Annexures B1, which I'll come to later, gives are really examples of the types of aspects of the due diligence that the team would look at.
A2, sorry.
Oh,
I
A2.
wanted to say A2.
So if you compare A1 with A2, the areas that I've indicated were not on the previous template, so it wasn't necessarily explicit to the committee whether an area under the investment process, such as if it was a fund of funds transaction, whether the fund of funds guideline was adhered to or not. It also wasn't explicit in terms of the credit risk enhancements regarding tangible or intangible security that would be available to the transaction to mitigate some other types of risks. And also, it also wasn't clear, most importantly, from page 5, in terms of the risk rating. So from page 6 onwards, we indicate an inherent risk as well as a residual risk, and the residual risk would be derived from the comments made in relation to the mitigants presented. And we've also given an indicator in terms of how we view the strength of that mitigant. And on page 5, it gives the team a consistent approach in terms of how they arrive at a particular residual risk in relation to what that inherent risk would originally be and what the strength of that control would be in relation to that risk.
You can continue.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. I'm on page 9, paragraph 7, detailing additional duties and responsibilities. Over time, particularly during the 2017 period, my duties and responsibilities under Mr. Magula's leadership expanded further by assisting with other activities inter alia, such as assisting him with the written updates for the risk department as input to the CEO's quarterly report to the board, standing in for him in committees where he was not able to attend, such as EXCO, the Audit and Risk Committee, or the Social and Ethics Committee. In some of these instances, these were without any formal delegation, but rather on instruction at a short notice. In some of these instances, I would be requested to attend these meetings without having sight of the agenda or the information that would have been tabled to that committee in respect of risk. 7.1.3, signing off of documents or memos on his behalf where the executive head of risk and compliance were required to sign off. Preparation of the departmental budgets for approval by EXCO, as well as assisting with reviews of policies, in particular in the market and credit risk areas. The activities outlined in sections 6 and 7 above, I beg your pardon, the activities outlined in section 6 and 7 activities are over and above my duties and responsibilities of that of the senior manager, enterprise-wide and operational risk, which in itself were enormous, given that there were only 2 resources up until October 2018, myself included, to manage these functions for operational risk. There was also one instance on or about April 2017 where I was instructed by my executive head to directly participate in a 3-day due diligence exercise for an investment considering outside of the country. The instruction came very late in the day from my executive head with the expectation to travel with the due diligence team the next morning to Tanzania to undertake a due diligence exercise. For this due diligence, I did not have the opportunity to do any prior due diligence preparation work. I received due diligence related information from the investment team members involved overnight and on the first day of the due diligence engagement. I had to play catch up on the mechanics of the deal whilst the due diligence was underway. Following from this DD exercise, I had to prepare and present a risk report, which formed part of the investment consideration documents for the PMC listed to consider for approval.
Sorry, can I stop you there? Did you get a chance to watch Mr. Magula's testimony yesterday?
Yes, Mr. Commissioner.
He testified yesterday that there was a period where he was sidelined and juniors were chosen to interact with the CEO directly. Is that correct? Is that true?
I can only think of one incident that he referred to, which was around the 2nd of February 2018 board meeting.
That's fine, thank you.
Whilst I personally felt that the extent of my responsibilities had expanded quite rapidly in 2017, I did not raise this with the executive head, as I could tell that the department in general was quite stretched and accepted these instructions to mean that I am assisting the team and supporting the executive head overall in achieving its objectives. I often felt overwhelmed by the extent of these additional responsibilities before me, wearing various hats across the different risk disciplines on any given day. However, I never explicitly raised this with my executive head, as I believed this would disappoint him and could reflect poorly on me.
Sorry, sorry. I just wanted to ask whether, because you said you didn't raise it, but if I looked at the tone of the statements you've read so far, it indicates you're very clearly a sense of being overwhelmed and rushed about and not doing things. Was there any particular reason why, other than being disappointed, you did not raise it? Because it's not, what it reflects is a lack of resource for the task at hand. And how would you deal with the question, or what is your view of that question of sufficient resources to do the job effectively and in the manner that you would want to do it?
Thank you for the question. Through you, Mr. Commissioner. I think the reason why I didn't raise it is because from where I was sitting, I was a little bit confused, because throughout that period, Mr. Magula indicated, as he indicated yesterday, that he was blocked from adding capacity to the team. And I also understand that there was a moratorium on positions in terms of advertising. But during that year, I did see positions being advertised in other departments. And I couldn't understand how come other departments, except for risk, are advertising and employing additional resources to their various departments. It was not a conversation that I had with him directly, given the level between us as a senior manager and him being the executive head. So I just continued following on the instructions that he gave me, and I tried my best in as much as there were multiple tasks before me. So sometimes some of these requests would come on a whim. He would come and say, you need to submit this memo tomorrow, or you need to table this to this committee on the day of actual submission, which put us under immense pressure. Even though we were under-resourced, a little bit of structure could have also helped in us managing many of these various tasks and these balls that we were juggling in the air.
Just a question, to be clear, are you indicating somehow that maybe there were issues with the department in terms of leadership, or are you saying that the department was suffering in some sense because it was blocked in terms of hiring people? I just want to be clear there.
Through you, Commissioner, I think the latter is a definite obvious. In terms of Mr. Magula being blocked. But regarding the leadership part, I don't know if I can truly answer that question fully, because, you know, one would have to assess how come other executive heads have the ability to make a request to the CEO and get a nod in terms of recruitment.
And, you know, are you aware that he was under pressure and he had a poor relationship over time, you know, with the CEO?
Yes, I was aware of that. He did indicate to me on occasions that he's under siege. That was the term he would use. And I did also witness occasions when he would get a call either from the CEO himself or from the CEO's PA. He would panic. And, you know, and I think that's fear that he had, you know, sort of, you know, instilled it in me in terms of what happens on the 7th floor. You know, if you get called, you should be afraid.
So, on balance, would you say the problems at risk department were more sort of more about people at the top or within the department itself, on balance?
On balance, I think that the department has never been given an opportunity to really demonstrate its capability. And I'll cover that in section 11, when I talk to the structure of the department. Because at this stage, it would be unfair to make an assessment of the capability of the department when you look at the actual skills on the ground and the level of the skill that's within the department currently.
Sorry, you may continue.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. In section 8, I'll be covering, as requested by the Commission, the processes regarding, in particular, the credit risk management function. Credit risk serves as an enabler for management decision-making in the investment process. The function is responsible for, amongst others, independent risk assessments of investment considerations, evaluation of the creditworthiness of a counterparty, recommending optimal risk mitigation strategies where identified, as well as commenting on the alignment of investment considerations with internal investment criteria and guidelines and client mandates. The primary activity of the function includes risk assessment of investment considerations for new investments, follow-on and/or restructured investments. Restructured investments would be those deals that are in distress and referred to workout. The team also participates in due diligence for investment considerations. In general, the credit analysts would therefore participate in on-site due diligence exercises, as well as meetings arranged and led by the investment teams. The credit analysts would perform their independent assessments based on their own understanding of the transaction at hand, receive and assess external information from the respective investee company and any other external due diligence report that would have been shared with them. The outcome of the due diligence exercise and assessment of all of this information culminates in a final risk report. The risk reports are compiled by the risk analysts that participate in the due diligence process, and these reports are signed off for submission by the compiler, the reviewer, and the executive head of risk. There were also occasions where credit risk analysts would perform desktop due diligence work and prepare their risk reports. In most instances, such desktop assessments would be as a result of either the nature of the transaction or when the request for risk reports is made on a short notice basis in relation to the PMC meeting that the investment team intended to table a decision. The sign-off of these risk reports to the various committees do not automatically constitute an implied recommendation by risk to approve the deal itself, as the content of the risk reports in some instances will flag various risks and propose mitigants for the committee to consider. In addition, there could be areas of concern that emanate from the other investment support team reports. The committee has the authority to approve or decline transactions. The executive head sign-off for recommended means that he gives the go-ahead to submit. The conclusion of the risk report is limited to the extent of disclosures made to the risk analyst either internally or externally during their risk assessment. There was a question posed regarding where does credit risk begin and end in the investment process. So 8.4 speaks to that. But before I get to 8.4, I just want to point out that before PMC 1, as the Commission has heard, there is another step before this, and it's called the deal screening process for within the unlisted space. Within the deal screening process, the fund principals and the investment associate principals will present very high-level proposals, looking primarily at mandate fit and appetite and whether it fits within a particular sector or strategy within PIC's investment strategy. So the purpose of deal screening is to get the go-ahead to proceed to scoping, which is PMC 1. However, the risk analysts are not part of that process. The members of the deal screening committee primarily comprise of the PMC members themselves and the fund principals that present to those committees. So if I start at 8.4.1, the investment teams present deal scoping reports to PMC 1 for approval to go to due diligence on their identified potential investment opportunities. In addition to the approval for due diligence, this approval is also important for PMC 1 to approve because there's also costs associated with the due diligence exercise in the form of external reports from service providers, which I have in the annexures. I'll speak to it later, as well as travel related to the transaction as well. If the investment is outside, of Pretoria. Once the investment opportunity is approved by PMC 1, the executive head for risk and compliance will allocate a resource from the risk team to work alongside the deal team. At the same time, resources from other investment support teams, being legal and ESG, will be allocated by their respective heads. The allocated risk resource will receive a copy of the scoping report presented to PMC 1, either by the executive head or by the deal team main member, to familiarize themselves with the transaction. It is important to highlight that the risk team is very small and comprised of 1 senior risk analyst and 2 risk analysts up to service both listed and unlisted investment considerations up until August 2018, wherein an additional risk analyst was employed. The deal team will lead and coordinate the due diligence exercise. The DD exercise varies from transaction to transaction, however, broadly incorporates the following: on-site visits to the business premises of the underlying investment or the prospective assets that the investee company is acquiring, engagement meetings with the sponsor and or management of the underlying investment, and where there is travel involved, a memo will be prepared by the deal team for approval, which will include the investment support teams being risk, ESG, and legal. In order to carry out their duties effectively, the risk analyst will prepare their own DD preparation notes for information and clarification on certain aspects of the transaction that has been identified, having read the investment team's scoping report, as well as any other information received prior to the DD itself. The investment teams are required to share all information at hand pertaining to the transaction with all the investment support teams. In some instances, depending on the confidentiality requirements surrounding the transaction, documents pertaining to the transaction are shared via controlled access in a virtual data room with the PIC teams involved in the due diligence. Some virtual data rooms only allow access for a limited period of time and also limit, in some cases, access to viewing rights only. This in itself can result in the supporting documentation not being available after the fact during normal internal audit processes, which can result in audit findings for the team. Where the risk analyst requires further assessment or information on a particular aspect of the transaction, they will refer this request to the sponsor or investee company management via the investment deal teams. The information that the risk team would typically obtain and assess includes, as outlined in Annexures B1 and B2, financial statements from investee companies, external due diligence reports received, example being commercial and due diligence reports, a legal due diligence report, a valuation report, a market study report, etc. The scope of the DD reports are outlined in Annexure B1 and B2 in the statement, just to give the Commission a sense of the type of aspects that the team would cover in conducting their risk assessment and compiling their risk report. Once complete, the risk analysts will table the assigned risk reports to the respective committees. The risk analyst also presents their report to the respective committees and may field questions posed to them by the committees from time to time. The process followed for submission to the respective committees is through the company secretariat department, who uploads all submissions onto the board pack system. The risk analyst's involvement ceases once a final decision is made by the committee, either approve or decline. Upon approval, the transaction moves into the legal and execution stage by the legal department. Upon decline, the investment team will liaise with the sponsor in this regard. Once the legal and execution process is concluded, the disbursement process commences. Amongst the other executive heads that sign off by risk during the disbursement process is for the executive head of risk and compliance only, and does not involve any analysis or otherwise by the risk analysts. The executive head for risk and compliance sign-off occurs after the following has been done. This is obviously after the transaction has been approved and legal agreements have been executed. We follow from 8.12.1. Investment operations, compilation of the disbursement file and agreements, including receipt of confirmatory letters that all conditions precedent are met or waived. Sign-off by ESG legal and investment teams involved in the execution stage. Sign-off by the respective head in investments. Mr. Commissioner, I just need to emphasize that the disbursement process that I've highlighted in 8.12 refers to the disbursement process for the unlisted investments. Can I proceed? I've also been requested by the Commission to speak to specific investments, in particular AO and Sagarmatha. AO Technologies.
Sorry. I think we've got sufficient information about IO. We'll go through that paragraph ourselves. I think we can jump that and go on to Sagarmatha.
Mr. Commissioner, if I may, there are a couple of issues that you wanted to address in the IO matter as far as her part was concerned. If Mr. Commissioner is agreeable, can she just raise them without going through that whole section in IO? Thank you.
You can pick out those that you think you'd like to.
I just want to highlight to the Commission that at the time that the AO transaction was done, Mr. Magula was still in the employ of PIC. So I was still operating in the reviewer capacity, if I can call it that. And then also, I signed off as reviewer of that risk report on or about the 15th of December. But I just want to point out in 9.1.5, at the time that the risk report was signed off, it did not strike me that the risk analyst being Chifango and Zaza, who had also primarily participated in the compilation of the final risk reports, had not included his name and his signature to the report. Upon reflection, this is not the norm, as the analyst is generally the compiler of his or her risk report and would sign off on this basis. Further to this, the compiler is also the person to present and speak to the detail of his or her report when representation is made to a committee. My understanding also is that Mr. Nzaza, being the senior of the two co-compilers, and not Ms. Mazibuko being the graduate, had presented the report to the committee on the 20th of December. I'll skip to 9.1.7. At the time of sign-off of the report, I was not privy to nor aware of the following, which has since come to light: that the irrevocable undertaking or subscription agreement had been signed prior to the meeting of the 20th of December 2017, and that the disbursement memo was signed prior to the meeting of the 20th of December 2017. Regarding disbursement processes, I am familiar with the disbursement processes for unlisted investments since my acting role in March 2018. And then also just to highlight, to date, I have never been involved in any of the internal disbursement processes for transactions in the listed portfolio, and therefore have no knowledge of, nor would have been in receipt of any documentation for disbursement sign-off for the AO Technologies transaction. And I think that also would speak to the executive head as well, because during this period that I've been acting, I've never been requested to sign off in that capacity. I also hereby state that even during the time of PIC preparing its report and presentation to the Standing Committee on Public Accounts, being SCOPA, which took place on the 6th of December, that I was not aware of these issues highlighted in 9.1.7 above. This information only came to my attention through internal audits investigation that was conducted in December 2018, after presentation to SCOPA in relation to the irrevocable subscription. I became aware of these issues and the actual investigation itself on the 12th of December 2018, wherein I was instructed via email the day before, on the 11th of December 2018, by the Executive Head of Human Resources to make myself available for an interview with Internal Audit. The Head of Internal Audit and the Acting CEO were copied on this email to me, which I've included as Annexure D. I just want to highlight that the interview with Internal Audit took place on the 12th of December 2018, and I was briefed on the scope of the investigation, and questions were put before me to answer, as well as requests for information such as email correspondence in relation to this transaction. All of this information I have since provided to PIC Internal Audit. I became aware of the said disbursement memo discussed above during the televised testimony made by Mr. Victor Seni at the PIC Commission of Inquiry on the 30th of January 2019.
Mr. Commissioner, at this point, I'd like to hand up a document which has been given to me by the head evidence leader from the JSC dated 19 December 27 regarding IO.
Yes, thank you.
Can I raise a question on that? Thank you for that document, and perhaps, I don't know whether you want it read in. Yeah. Can we ask whether you read it into the record? And then I'll have some questions after that.
I shall do so. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. It is dated 19 December 2017. Your reference, Dr. Daniel Machila. It says JSC Limited. It's to the attention of Annalie De Bruin, and it says, Dear Annalie, undertaken to JSC to subscribe for shares in IO Technology Solutions Limited. In paragraph 1, the Public Investment Corporation, acting on behalf of the Government Employees Pension Fund, hereby confirms to the JSC that it has irrevocably committed to subscribe for 99,782,655 ordinary shares in IO Technology subscription shares at an issue price of 43 Rand per share, and for a total issue consideration of, what is that? 290,654,165. I'm sorry, I'm also not good at maths, on listing, to take place on Thursday, 21 December 2017. Due to a liquidity issue, only 500 million of the subscription consideration will be available on listing. The balance of the subscription consideration will be available on Friday, the 22nd of December 2017. In this regard, the PIC has today liquidated certain positions held by the GEPF and will have the requisite funds available on Friday, the 22nd December 2017 by no later than 2 p.m. The PIC hereby irrevocably commits and undertakes to the JSC that it will pay the balance of the subscription consideration directly to IO Technology on Friday, the 22nd December 2017. Thereafter, IO Technology will instruct its transfer secretaries, Link Market Services South Africa Proprietary Limited, to issue the subscription shares to the GEPF on Wednesday, the 27th December 2017, as an allotment free of payment. The PIC hereby irrevocably confirms to the JSC that it is full committed to subscribing for the subscription shares at the subscription consideration that it will ensure that the above is implemented in manner set out in the above letter. Yours faithfully, Daniel Machila, and it is signed. Chief Executive Officer.
Thank you very much. And then perhaps to the evidence leader, not to you, Ms. Abrams, because I don't think this is your responsibility to reply to. But I would want to refer you back to the memo we were discussing earlier with Ms. Adams. And if we looked at that memo, which is GA1 in her testimony, and go back to the signing and the approvals, we've got an approval by Ms. More on the 19th of the 12th that funds are available. And yet this letter is saying on the 19th that there are no funds available and that the funds will only be available on the 22nd after the liquidation of certain shares and the creation of liquidity. Will you be able to perhaps find out the status from Ms. More as to her knowledge of the funds being available when clearly the letter to the JSC indicates that they are not?
We will find that out, Mr. Commissioner. We'll follow it up.
And perhaps also the implications for the meeting of the PMC on the 20th, because therefore the information to the PMC, and we heard earlier that maybe some of the members did not have full information. This information, and if this is what was tabled, there was a question that and we don't know what was said at that meeting because it looked from the information we've had so far, that the developments or the events of the 19th were not conveyed to that meeting. And therefore, part of the follow-up investigations would need to be whether that meeting, in fact, was fully informed and able to take an appropriate decision, given this information.
We will follow it up, Mr. Commissioner. Thank you. You may continue.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. I'll move to 9.2 on Sagarmatha, and I will start on 9.2.3. This investment was tabled to the PMC listed committee for approval on or about April 2018. The transaction presented by the deal team to the committee was such that, through their own assessment of the investment valuation, the team made a recommendation to invest in the IPO, albeit at a proposed share price much lower than the asking price in the IPO pre-listing statement, amongst other CPs. In so doing, this would ultimately, to my mind, render the offer unattractive to Sagarmatha for PIC to subscribe in the IPO. Whilst the investment was within the PMC listed's delegation of authority for approval, the transaction was, however, referred to the investment committee as well. The deal team presented the similar investment case and recommendations to the investment committee in respect of the proposed offer price, being their intrinsic value. The investment committee made it clear to management that the approval was well within the mandated authority. Amongst other things, the investment committee members, however, did comment and expressed their concerns regarding whether or not Sagarmatha would utilize some of the IPO proceeds towards expunging some of the obligations to the PIC in the unlisted investments portfolio with regards to the independent news media transaction. I'll move to section 10, paragraph 10, regarding human resources and remuneration concerns. Due to my personal experience, there is no clear and transparent approach in the manner in which remuneration is calculated and determined for staff. In my experience, through my acting capacity as the acting executive head for risk and compliance, and thus as an ExCo member, my input into the determination of annual salary increases, short-term incentives, and long-term incentives, collectively referred to herein as remuneration, ends after the ExCo for balanced scorecard moderation, which deliberates and makes decisions on the final balanced scorecard scores for staff. This deliberation and decision at the ExCo BSc moderation excludes moderation of the ExCo members themselves. I'm not privy to, nor am I consulted or given an opportunity into the actual calculation and determination of remuneration for staff that report into the executive head for risk and compliance function. Whilst I am required by the Human Resources Department to sign off remuneration letters for staff as the executive head for the department, this remuneration, in my mind, is already predetermined. The letters addressed to each staff member outlining the remuneration are compiled and printed by the Human Resources Department and then are sent for my signature. The timing of the signing of these letters itself would render me unable to give input therein, as the letters are, in my experience, circulated for signature about a day or two before actual payment into staff bank accounts is made. This therefore would infer...
Sorry, does this mean that you are required to sign a letter that informs an employee about his remuneration, adjusted or not adjusted, without you having had an input?
That is correct, Mr. Commissioner.
Let's just check that. Is that part of the policy of the PIC that this happens this way or not?
Through you, Mr. Commissioner, in terms of the practice, this is what I understand how it's done. And understand that I've been through one round of this process, having acted for 12 months. And there has been a lot of questions about how does HR arrive at particular short-term incentives or long-term incentives by executive heads themselves in ExCo. And, you know, if I recall, the assurance that we've been provided with is that the process via the HR policy is audited by internal audit. And internal audit themselves have said that we audit this process every year. The extent to which they audit pre and post, I don't know what the answer is there.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay. So I was on 10.4 and I was speaking about when the letters were being circulated. Because the letters are circulated a day or two before funds reflect in the bank accounts, this would also infer that the payroll process would have already been concluded, as I understand that the processing of payroll payments requires about 5 to 7 days for the Human Resources Department to process before funds reflect in the staff bank accounts. The subject of remuneration is a bone of contention generally among staff, and there's very little congruency, in my view, in the practice relative to what is communicated in general by the Human Resources Department. In my experience, the HR department has communicated widely that regrading and salary adjustments therein are conducted to ensure that staff are remunerated at the midpoint of their grade. During my acting period, staff within my own department have indicated to me that after having approached the Human Resources Department to see the pay scale of their particular grade, they establish that they are remunerated below the midpoint of their pay scale. I would also like to highlight to the Commission that in regards to remuneration for the Risk and Compliance Department, my level of input has been further muted. This is as a result of an EXCO that took place addressing regrading in December 2018. Whilst I was on official leave, annual leave from this date, I felt it was an important meeting to attend as it affected the department that I oversee, and I went into the office specifically for this meeting. However, when the meeting was about to commence, the executive head for Human Resources indicated to the meeting that this meeting is for pure EXCO and not actors, citing that actors were conflicted. My colleague and I, who was also acting at the time, were excused from this meeting. To date, I have had no correspondence from HR regarding any regrading decisions, if any, for my department. And I just want to also indicate, Mr. Commissioner, post my signing of the statement, there was another sitting at EXCO last week regarding the same subject, and I was again asked to be excused.
Yeah, let's just check. Okay.
Sorry, no, go for it.
Okay. Acting role, I mean, doesn't it come with all the delegations and all the powers, that one gets?
That is correct, Mr. Commissioner. In fact, this occurred in December and again now this year. And following from the normal BSc moderation committee, which EXCO moderates the final scores of the organization, we did have about 3 attempted sittings for regrading, and the regrading was meant to address those people who were not regraded in 2017. And in those sittings, I was not excused from those meetings. In as much as a decision and an outcome was not reached, I was party to the discussions, not just for the other departments, but for my department in particular.
If I could ask you, just in relation to, obviously that relates to your department and your ability to give a real assessment of how your staff have worked, rather than something else. But what about your own circumstance? Is there an engagement and interaction with you, your seniors, a proper assessment of the work done, and and a discussion with you about what remuneration or changes you get, as well as bonus and so on? Is there actually an engagement, or how do you receive that information, if any?
So I joined in January 2017, which meant that, and the year end is March, which meant that I wouldn't have been eligible for a short-term incentive for the 2016-2017 year. So my first encounter regarding performance appraisal would have been in 2018. Ordinarily, it would have been with the executive head in my capacity as senior manager for enterprise-wide and operational risk. However, at the time, I was already acting and reporting directly to Dr. Dan. The process is such that, and it goes for staff as well, you will grade yourself, rate yourself based on what you believe you've achieved from a performance rating perspective, and your manager will also rate you. And then thereafter for staff, it will go to the EXCO moderation committee. For myself, I think because I was wearing two hats, and because I was reporting to Dr. Dan sat with me, and we went through my balance scorecard. There was a little bit of deliberation. He explained to me where he agrees with certain ratings, because there's a bunch of weightings on the BSc itself, and I was satisfied with the score that he gave me. In relation to whether my score translated into the STI that I received, that was never discussed with me. So I'm going to just proceed to the last paragraph of my statement today. And I think through you, Mr. Commissioner, there was a question raised earlier regarding competency levels across all the different risk disciplines for an executive head. I'll try and cover it through the statement itself, but if not, I will also add, if that's okay. It has always been my belief that the department has been undercapacitated.
Sorry, just to give us the paragraph reference.
It is 11.1 on page 18. It was always my belief that the department was undercapacitated in order to effectively execute its duties and responsibilities. However, I was not privy to the actual approved structure to understand the level of undercapacitation until I was acting. During 2017, there was a request by EXCO indicating that the organization could not fill all approved roles and that each department head should review and prioritize critical roles.
Sorry, was there any reason given for that?
Through you, Mr. Commissioner, there could have been a reason at EXCO. However, Mr. Magula was still in the employ and would have been privy to that information. 11.3, I became aware of the department's approved structure across all of the functions after I received the approved structure from Human Resources. As it stands, the total approved positions is 51. The current head count stands at 22, and this includes 2 administrative roles, leaving 29 positions vacant and resulting in a capacity rate of 43% and a vacancy rate of 57%. In my view, critical to the functioning of the department is the appointment of aptly qualified and skilled professionals at the general manager level and the senior manager level. And these positions, in terms of the GM and SM level, are within the approved structure. At the general manager level within the department, there have been no resources during my tenure, whilst the structure reflects that there should be 3 GMs within the department. And these would be for General Manager for Enterprise-Wide and Operational Risk, General Manager for Investment Risk, which would cover both market and credit risk, as well as a General Manager for Data Programming, which would cover static data management and performance and attribution. Besides the 3 GMs, my apologies, Mr. Commissioner, there was also a head of compliance role that was not filled until we recruited towards the latter part of 2018, and that position has been filled. I have no knowledge as to whether these roles were occupied in past times before I joined the organization. At the senior manager level, since my joining, there have only been 2 senior managers within the department, including myself, out of a total of 6 senior managers across the different functions. My understanding is that whilst the positions are approved within the structure, permission to recruit and advertise through the HR department must first be sought by the CEO through a signed memorandum. Under my leadership
Just a check, just a question. So if sort of roles are approved, are they budgeted for? Is there a budget for those roles for that particular year? Because then you can fill them then, if they're budgeted for.
Through you, Commissioner, those roles are budgeted for, as far as I understand. And in fact, during the last round of the budgeting period, when the finance department was preparing the budget as part of the corporate plan, they included the budget assuming full capacity when calculating the sustainability ratios, etc.
So meaning that there's nothing stopping you from filling these positions then?
Other than a signature.
A signature?
On a memo.
From the CEO?
Yes, so I understand that this structure was approved some time ago. It's not as if this was a recently approved structure. And obviously, you don't fill 10 roles at once because you can only advertise and interview so many people at any given stage. So, like, to give you an example, last year we covered, we employed 6 positions. We filled 6 positions that were vacant. 4 of them were external and 2 of them were internal appointments. But even those positions, we had to get a memo signed off well, let me put it this way. HR was not comfortable to advertise those roles without me obtaining a signed memo. I'll skip over to 11.7. At the current capacity level, the department is still overstretched and under-resourced with managerial skills to oversee day-to-day functions and duties of the rest of the team. The extent of capacity constraints is also evident by the previous executive head stretching resources across the functions. An example of this would be myself fulfilling additional duties, as already expressed earlier in my statement in section 6 and 7. There was also some confusion among staff fulfilling duties that they were not mandated to do. An example of this refers to a senior market risk analyst executing credit risk duties and also a credit risk analyst fulfilling market risk duties. This practice was in existence from before I joined the PIC and continued in this fashion until the CEO sent me an instruction via email. The email is included as Annexure E to remedy this situation. Leading up to the email instruction, I was not aware that this practice was in fact improper until the executive head of HR brought it to my attention that there was nothing in writing or approved that allowed the, if I can call it in inverted commas, swapping of roles and responsibilities between a credit analyst and a market risk analyst that were in practice before. The CEO's written instruction to this end followed shortly from the executive head of HR's revelation. Whilst the remediation
Sorry,
of these...
just dealing with that remediation, because the question of remediation, I would assume, would require additional people. Or just reverting the people back to their original roles, so that you remain with work undone.
That is essentially correct, but I think what HR was pointing out to me is that if you are hired to fulfill compliance function, you should not be undertaking operational risk work, for example, because that's not your area of speciality, in the sense that that is what you are hired to do based on your skill set.
I think, I think that's correct, but that assumes that there's somebody to fill the other areas that are not then being attended to. Otherwise, you have, let's take the very examples that you use, a market risk analyst using credit risk. So move market risk analyst back to market risk. Who does credit risk? So that's why I'm asking you in the redeeming or the remedy of that, what was open to you? What was possible to fix it that ensured that a credit risk analyst was a credit risk analyst and was in place?
So through you, Commissioner, perhaps my statement wasn't clear. At the time, there was a market risk analyst employed who was undertaking credit risk work. Simultaneously to that, there was a credit risk analyst undertaking market risk work. So I had to then swap them around. And that's essentially the remediation. And it did not necessarily add any additional capacity on either side, but it was a requirement to regularize the roles in terms of what they've been employed to do. And also, it has an impact on their BSc as well, because at the end of the year, if you are employed in a particular area, how then do you get the benefit of being compensated for doing other work, which one could argue was ad hoc? Whilst the remuneration of these respective roles has been undertaken by me following the instruction from the CEO, this was not well received and was viewed with skepticism by one of the affected parties. The affected party in question was the senior market risk analyst, who was unhappy with my instruction to discontinue executing credit risk duties and to resume market risk duties, and viewed it negatively as removal from executing the credit risk duties would result in not having the privileges associated with the credit risk role. These include travel both locally and internationally, as well as receipt of subsistence and travel funds whilst traveling on DD. I must highlight that prior to the written instruction from the CEO, there was suspicion and concern, not only at a management level, but also among staff in general, that the said senior market risk analyst was allegedly party to leaking of PIC information in relation to controversial investment transactions that were in the media. The suspicion and concern...
Sorry. Who was this person?
I beg your pardon, sir?
Who was this person that you referred to in 11.13?
Chifango Nzaza.
Can you explain further there? Can you explain further? You are saying the person was, they were saying he was leaking some information. Which one? Which information?
So...
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
So the suspicion...
Yeah, continue, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, continue.
The suspicion and concern stem from the fact that there were PIC risk reports in the hands of the media, and in all instances, these reports were all compiled by the same analyst within the Risk and Compliance Department, being Mr. Nzaza. As the head of the department, at the time, I viewed this in a serious light, and so did Mr. Nzaza himself, as his personal reputation within the organization was being brought into disrepute. However, I was doubtful as to whether he was responsible for leaking the said reports himself, as I could not establish a motive as to why a staff member at his level would do so. I think it's also important to highlight to the Commission that, as indicated earlier in my statement, our risk reports are submitted to and tabled to various committees, and these documents are uploaded into the board PAC system. So anybody who has access to a particular committee PAC would have access to these documents as well. So it would be unfair to say that the person who prepared their own report would be the one to leak it, when there would be more than 10 other people who would have access to those and other documents. I must highlight that for the most part, Mr. Nzaza's skill and capability is, in my opinion, not in question. Whilst working as a risk analyst in credit, he conducted good risk analysis, which is reflected in the risk reports that he produced, as well as in his conviction when he presented his reports. However, given the situation, I made a decision on my own to limit and reduce the amount of credit risk work to Chifango to try and understand whether the leaking of his reports was coincidental to the controversial nature of the investment transactions which he was a party to in compiling those risk reports. I did not communicate these reasons to him, which led to his feeling of being disenfranchised by my actions. His level of discontentment under my leadership escalated after I instituted the CEO's instruction to swap the roles of the two analysts. Regarding capacitation of the department...
Just a question. I mean, do you think he was targeted somehow with this kind of changes which were asked for?
Do you mean internally? It's very difficult to say with certainty, and I think Mr. Magula himself also testified yesterday, where he himself was also, considered a suspect. And I think because of the fact that every report that went out into the media, it unfortunately was a report that he had worked on, because he had worked on those particular transactions. And I don't know if because of that coincidence it was presumed, but from where I was sitting, I needed to satisfy myself, and he was also very uncomfortable with the atmosphere in terms of how people were starting to view him. So I decided to remove him from that. Not completely, but so at the time when I made the decision, there was still some due diligence work that was allocated to him, but I did not, going forward, allocate new work to him, because I needed to establish that out of the 4 analysts in the team, why is it only one person's reports going out? Is it in relation to the deal itself and it's coincidental? Or, so if I'm allocating other complex transactions to other to other risk analysts, would these then also end up in the hands of the media? And I specifically did not inform him of my intentions or the reasons why I allocated less work to him. Because at the end of it, when I would have been satisfied that to say to him, you know what, this is not you, it would have given him also some comfort that I did not have any influence in his actions whilst I was, assessing this thing on my own. Okay. Regarding capacitation of the department, it is my view that the managerial level, being the GMs, head, and SMs within the department, is critical to ensure good governance and comprehensive oversight of risk reporting to the various committees indicated earlier. These roles would ideally drive the development, annual review for approval and adherence to policies, procedures and guidelines across the various functions within risk. Admittedly, the department continues to find itself having repeat audit findings of outdated policies and other audit findings raised by internal audit relating to the comprehensive nature of output. It is my view that without these requisite managerial roles overseeing the analysts and also filling those analyst roles, without these being in place to support the executive head and oversee these direct reports, the department will continue to struggle to be fully effective in executing its second line of defense role and to be fully effective assurance provider to the first line of defense, management and the board. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mrs. Abrahams.
Yeah, I just want to check that question which I asked about the super risk role versus maybe risk roles within the various divisions and all that, if you could.
I understand that there has been talk through the Commission about an optimal operating model for PIC, and it was intimated that there should be a head of credit. I think it was Ms. Beswick that raised it, that there should be a head of credit within the different areas within PIC, being PE, private equity, listed, unlisted, etc., and properties. I do think that there is a level of specialization that's required within risk across the different functions. If you just take the areas within market risk versus credit risk versus enterprise risk, those are very specific risk disciplines. And you cannot move somebody day to day fulfilling those functions because they are so specialized. And I also think that, so you need some level of specialization, and in having that, you also need senior people to oversee the team, which is a big gap that we have at the moment. So from where the executive head is sitting, having the right skill set at the right levels within the department, I do believe that the executive head would be sufficiently capacitated to manage and oversee the department. So to give you an example, right now I'm wearing 2 hats. However, a lot of my time is spent in the acting executive head capacity. With that responsibility, I'm also a member and an invitee to several committee meetings. Those committee meetings can span up to a full business day. In some instances, because there's so many of them, it could be 3 days a week. So what happens when I'm sitting in a boardroom for 2 or 3 out of 5 days a week, and the analysts who are executing the work don't have somebody on the floor to really oversee the day-to-day stuff. So it creates additional pressure for them and for me as well, having to review things after hours. They also have their own families. They sometimes, because they committed to their work, they will wait for me. I sometimes have to disengage in a meeting to review their work, electronically, just so that they can meet a deadline as well. So I do believe that if that department is capacitated appropriately, it doesn't even need to be 100%. I've done my own estimation that even if we get to 75 or 80%, it will make a world of a difference in terms of the quality of the output that would come from that department.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks.
You testified earlier that you have been acting since March 2018, am I correct?
That is correct, Commissioner.
And for how long are you supposed to act? Is it open-ended?
I started acting in March 2018, and I think at the time it wasn't a planned transition, given Mr. Magulas's suspension. And from where I was sitting as well, I did not expect to act for so long, you know, to be here today as well. And I think that I've been acting now for 12 months. And as far as I understand, one should not be acting for more than 12 months in an acting capacity, especially at this level. However, I do find myself still acting post 12 months in this role. And this has been raised. I have raised this with the Audit and Risk Committee as well. I do think that for the organization as a whole, an important role such as this should have a permanent incumbent capable to execute and have the resources at their disposal to bring some source of not just governance, but I think also some assurance to our stakeholders, such as our clients, and to the market in general.
Chair, can I ask a question in relation to that? And perhaps it's not only for Ms. Abrams, but it's also for the team. I think it would be very useful to get, because a lot of the references are to acting positions, if we can have a comprehensive indication of who has been acting in what position and for what period of time, not just Ms. Abrams. And secondly, whether there's not some labor legislation. I have a recollection, and it may be inaccurate, that once you've acted for 6 months continuously, there is an obligation to actually appoint you if you are continuing to hold that position, or to deal with you fairly that you're actually running that job in that capacity. So if we could get some clarity in that regard, but certainly the number of people in acting positions is of great concern, and then the duration of those people acting. And then the third element that I would like is that in all the witnesses that we have seen, or in many of the witnesses that we have seen come forward, their tenure at the PIC tends to be fairly short, 2, 3, and therefore 2 or 3 years, and therefore what is the overall length of service, because it's not just about length of service, it's knowledge of experience, handovers, legacy matters, history matters. You know, what is the average duration of term of office in those positions, not just in acting, but generally? There seems to be a very short turnover, I mean a very short period of occupation of those positions that we've seen so far. 2, 3 years seems to be pretty much the case. So I think just that information for the Commission would be very helpful.
We'll do that. Thank you. Ms. Abrams, have you been paid in that capacity or not?
I have not been remunerated for acting. I had a conversation with the Human Resources Executive last year. There was a little bit of to and fro in terms of the explanation. Initially, I was told that I would be remunerated after 6 months of consecutive service, back paid, and monthly thereafter. When it came to around about October and nothing had come to the fore, I approached him again, and he said to me that I misunderstood, that the policy in fact is that I will be remunerated, I qualify to be remunerated after 6 consecutive months of acting. However, I will be remunerated after 12 months of acting consecutively, or when my acting period terminates, whichever comes first. And to date, I have not been remunerated.
Thank you, Commissioner. That is the testimony of Ms. Abrams.
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Is it Adams, eh? Abrams. Mrs. Abrams, thank you very much for your testimony. Thanks for the time that you took off to come and testify before us.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner.
Thank you.
Mr. Commissioner, we're ready to proceed with the next witness. If you'll just give us a minute to rearrange the chairs.
Can I feel like a cup of coffee.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. The next witness is Mr. Alvin Edgar Schill, and he is present and ready to take the prescribed oath.
No objection to taking the oath?
I have no objection, sir.
Do you swear that the evidence you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth? Raise your right hand, so help me God.
So help me God.
Thank you. You may be seated.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Mr. Schill, is it correct that you have prepared your own statement?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
Nobody asked you from my legal team to insert anything into this statement against your will?
No, none of that.
Can you then please proceed? And can I place on record, Mr. Commissioner, that I've agreed with the witness that his evidence is in two parts. The first will be dealing with the rental of the building, And his second part of the evidence will be the HR part of the witness statement, and we'll deal with that tomorrow morning.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. My name is Alvin Scheel. In terms of qualifications and work experience, I have a BCom management qualification with a distinction in management. I achieved this in 2005. I've been employed in the construction and property sector over the past 14 years, and I have what would be considered a cradle-to-grave experience in relation to property investment, having done from building, lease negotiation, etc. I've been employed at the Public Investment Corporation since 2010, and I currently occupy the position of Development Manager in the Property Division, a position held since 2012. I'm also currently the longest serving member within the Property Division at this time. As a Development Manager, I'm responsible to support the Property Asset Management team in the growth and redevelopment of the property portfolio of our respective clients. So far, all my projects, current and past, have been on behalf of the GPF. This would include defining the scope, appointing the required professional team, that is the architect, project manager, engineers, quantity surveyors, etc. And thereafter, I lead this professional team to prepare detailed designs in line with the approved scope, and based on the final designs to prepare a viability or feasibility, which forms the basis for approval by asset management through the normal approval structures of our delegation of authority. On the approval of the feasibilities, it is my responsibility to coordinate the actual construction and related activities, including but not also limited to leasing and the coordination of that, marketing strategies, tenant fit-outs, etc. Broadly, the key performance areas of a development manager is to ensure that the yield that was approved at the feasibility stage is achieved through careful management of the budget, while ensuring the development progresses as scheduled to ensure contractual occupation and opening dates are achieved. There is also a special focus on the quality to ensure the development performs well over the long term. A crucial part of this role is regular reporting into the asset management team, with a special focus on updates on construction program progress, as well as pertinent financial information, including spend to date, leasing updates, and financial forecasts. These reports are critical for timeliest risk management related to refurbishment or development projects. Under Section 2, I want to make the Commission aware of a declaration at this time. And it should be noted that I'm currently facing a disciplinary process that commenced on the... Apologies. Mr. Commissioner.
Mr. Scheel, just a question. In terms of developments that you do for the PIC, do you do direct property, on behalf of the GPF through the PIC? And do you also help with developments with other co-partners when you develop buildings?
Thank you. Through you, Commissioner, yes, that's correct. I work in the directly held property space, so properties that we manage and develop directly on behalf of GPF with our internal team, as opposed to unlisted or indirectly held property. So how we would typically do developments in the cases of existing buildings within the GPF's name, we would redevelop those assets or develop new assets as and when would be suitable in terms of the investment strategy for that particular property. We also then engage in various deal structures around new developments, particularly where these developments are brought in by outside parties, where we then often co-develop with them. And you will see later in my submission, I discuss one of these co-development arrangements specifically, which is becoming a more typical way of operating in the environment that we currently are in.
So to sort of redevelop V&A waterfront as part owner, you would participate in that too? Is that so?
Almost. The V&A sits in a different entity, and because it's such a big vehicle, sits with its own management team in place. So it's viewed more as an indirect type of thing. The developments where we are directly involved are more new developments and tend to be smaller in scale. So for example, some of the properties that are held like that within Pareto, for example, has its own board and operates on its own, the same with V&A. I operate on directly held properties, not held within structures like that.
That's clear, yeah, thanks.
Okay. To my declaration, it should be noted that I'm currently facing a disciplinary process which commenced on the 15th of Jan 2019, and this related to the irregular appointment of a contractor on one of the developments that I oversee. I will expand on this matter in detail in the second part of my submission on HR practices at PIC. The reason, however, I specifically raise it now is to dispel any notion that the first part of my evidence, at least, is that of a disgruntled or an aggrieved employee. As I, on more than one occasion, attempted to present the evidence that I will now present and prior to me being charged. Given that the whistleblower's process was highly compromised, as already confirmed by other employees and witnesses, I did not consider the official channels an option. The first attempt to provide this information was to the Attorney General's office directly by talking to someone I knew at the AG's office, and this was in October 2017. But after consideration and noting that they had not made a finding despite what I felt was a clear violation and which a relatively simple audit process should have picked up, given that in my assumption a transaction with a value of more than 350 million would at least garner some scrutiny, I decided to continue to sit on the evidence.
Sorry, just for clarity, it's the Auditor General?
Yes, Commissioner. I again attempted to provide the evidence when a mail regarding the Budlander investigation and the email address for providing information was circulated to staff. This was on the 11th of September 2018, and the email I referred to is attached. And you'll note from the content of that I was advised to wait for this commission. And it was felt that the evidence fell outside the scope of the investigation of the Budlander report, and so I was advised to wait for this, though not yet having a chair and not yet having a terms of reference. It was at that time already announced. In short, I would like the Commission to consider the evidence that I'm about to present with this background in mind. Fruitless and wasteful expenditure. The background to this is that one of the projects that I was responsible for was the Menlyn Main Central Square development. It's a 1.4 billion rand mixed-use development consisting of 30,000 square meters of retail and 12,000 square meters of office space. It was developed in one of the structures, as we discussed, in a co-ownership structure with Menlyn Main Investment Holdings and GPF. As PIC, we represented the GPF, and as the assigned development manager, I was involved with the project since 2014. It was completed in March 2016. Oh, I apologize, I think that should be March 2017. This is the building.
A question?
Chair.
Can you please tell us who is in Menlyn Main Holdings? Who are the people there?
Chair, I'm not exactly sure of how the structure of Menlyn Main Investment Holdings is comprised. What I can say is that they have the rights for the whole Menlyn Main development, and as such, we had previously acquired 2 properties within that scheme, and as part of the development of that scheme and the build-out, the Central Square shopping centre and office building were then decided as a strategic investment within that. And through various deals being structured, we then bought into that scheme in lieu of our investment in it. And so I'm not aware of the details of that, but we own the 50% as GPF.
We can
Mr. Commissioner, I can
Yeah.
get the
Yeah.
necessary information. I'll provide it to the Commission.
All right. But just to check, could it be these large companies, Growth Point or whatever, or is just private individuals?
No, it's not. It's not one of the big funds as such. They are relatively newly established around this precinct,
This area.
and have only a few assets, from my understanding at this time.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
This is the building that currently houses the PIC office, which is number 1 Central Square. As a PIC employee and the GPF's representative on the project, I was directly involved in the negotiation of the offer to PIC as well as the associated fit-out project of the PIC's office space. It should be noted that in terms of my role as a development manager, I was acting as a GPF representative, although a PIC employee. That is, I was responsible to look out for the interest of GPF, and PIC corporate was responsible to look out for the PIC related interests. So it's just a HATS scenario, and it can be confusing. So the way I set out this agreement is through the eyes of the GPF. On or about August 2014, or let me start with, this is the negotiation with PIC. On or about August 2014, the FSB at the time, now called FSCA, which occupied Block B of Riverwalk Office Park, which is adjacent to the highway on Gasfontein, off-ramp, indicated to the PIC that they needed additional space at the office park. The Riverwalk Office Park, which comprised of 3 blocks along the highway, blocks A, B, and C, are 100% directly held GPF buildings. So to that end, the PIC properties team began formal discussions with PIC corporate, which at the time occupied 3 floors in Block C of Riverwalk Office Park. To consider, and the intent was for PIC to consider an office relocation to accommodate the FSB's growing space requirements, which at the time occupied more square meters than PIC. I will now below or set out in a chronological summary the process that followed, which culminated in the PIC relocating to Menlyn Main number 1 Central Square. I have provided a detailed chain of events with all the supporting documents to the evidence leader, but for this purpose I will touch only on pertinent facts related to the matter. The relocation of the PIC corporate office was approved in principle at the 18 August 2014 EXCO meeting. On the 5th of October 2015, EXCO was informed that the offer to lease was received. This was in relation to Menlyn Main. In line with the details as set out in the submission entitled Menlyn Main Central Square West Tower, the building was initially called the West Tower. It was later changed to number 1 Central Square. This was the PIC offer, and at the time this process was spearheaded by Ms. Petra Decker. A revised offer following this meeting was signed by Dr. Dan, the CEO, on the 20th of January 2016, and the offer was countersigned or accepted by the landlord on the 12th of February 2016. At this time, the offer is now irrevocable. At a meeting of EXCO on the 2nd of February, the committee is informed that the anticipated move date will be between September 2016 and December 2016. Further, the landlord would be doing the fit-out on behalf of PIC Corporate as a turnkey solution. At this meeting, it was resolved by the EXCO that the CFO, Ms. More, and the Executive Head of Corporate Services, Ms. Decker, would be responsible for the office interiors in terms of the look and feel, etc. On 18 May 2016, the Executive Head of Corporate Services, Ms. Decker, leaves the employ of PIC, and she is never replaced. And so from this day on, the CFO is directly responsible for the look and feel as per the meeting of the 2nd of February 2016. On 13 June 2016, EXCO is again reminded that the target date of occupation will be no later than December 2016. On 27 June 2016, I met with the CFO, Ms. More, to review the budget and proposed layout plans. These were approved by herself, and this decision was communicated to the project team responsible for the fit-out. By this time, we are already running slightly behind schedule on the timelines that we had communicated to PIC for information required to make the December move date. Between June and September 2016, numerous meetings are held and correspondence sent in an effort to get the information flow resolved from PIC Corporate. The slow release of information is now having a direct impact on the occupation date of the PIC office. On September 16, 2016, I once again highlight to the CFO the extreme pressure on the program, requesting the release of information on the critical path of construction no later than Monday, 18 September 2016, to have any chance of occupying the building in time. By the end of 2016, it is now an accepted fact, of November 2016 should I say, it's now an accepted fact that the PIC will not make the lease commencement date of the 1st of Jan 2017. So just as a note, the intention was for them to move in December, to be in occupation by the time the lease commenced on the 1st of January. As we are now, by this time, 10 weeks behind program, and the builder's holiday is around the corner. In a mail dated 29 November 2016, the CFO berates me for putting the PIC Office Move Committee chairperson under pressure to make certain decisions required to be able to proceed with construction, which had basically come to a halt at this time due to a lack of information required. The CFO further confirms that IT is not in a position to confirm when they will be ready to move, but that according to her, it won't be before March or April 2017. Following the exchange referred to above, Menlyn Main Investment Holdings opts to get their development manager, so they have a counterpart position of my position in their structure, to engage with the CFO on the PIC corporate fit-out. A meeting is then held between the development manager of Menlyn Main Investment Holdings and the CFO on the 29th of November 2016. A summary of these points the points discussed is included in an email to the CFO on the 1st of December 2016, and this includes that the targeted move date would be the 1st of March 2017, as well as that the third floor, which would previously be left as a white box, so as in it would not be fitted out with furniture, etc., it would just have a ceiling in basically, which was created for expansion, was now to be fitted out. And so in essence it meant that plans that were previously approved were now revised to include additional work, and this was in December 2016. It was also then discussed that PIC would be interested in leasing the second floor, which had all along been excluded from their lease and excluded from their offer. It should also be noted that this area was never considered, as even with expansion in terms of the targeted organogram, this space, according to our estimations, would not be required. The CFO further indicates that she personally wants to approve much of the actual furnishings and fittings, even though these form part of the look and feel and sample boards previously approved by herself. These were prepared by the appointed interior architects who were multiple award-winning team of Burgertman and Partners Interiors. in their own right specialists in the field. As of January 2017, the CFO communicates directly with the development manager from Menlyn Main Investment Holdings and no longer engages the PIC property team in any form. All subsequent decisions taken by the CFO are communicated to the Menlyn Main Investment Holdings development manager, which in turn informs the co-ownership of the decision. So just as a point of clarity, because it is a co-ownership structure, the co-ownership which has GPF representatives as well as Menlyn Main Investment Holdings representative meet on a monthly basis as a board of sorts to discuss and approve things related to the project. And this meeting is then called the Central Square Co-Ownership Meeting, which you'll see reference to later on. Decisions made during this time include the decision to employ a different interior design team to complete work initially assigned to Boergertman and Partners Interiors. It is understood that this firm is handpicked by the CFO and that based on their profile, the PIC was their first large project. Among the results of the decision is a finishing palette that has two distinct and clashing design themes as opposed to the original single design and color scheme. This also results in an increase in cost, but more significantly, long delays in terms of the program at a time when PIC is already liable for rental in terms of the offer they had signed.
Is it possible to get the name of this new design company?
It would be possible, Chair.
Mr.
It will
Lube?
be provided with the other information, Mr.
With the other information, okay.
As a result of the slow decision-making and repeated changes made, the original occupation date of the 1st of January 2017, per the signed offer of the 10th of December 2016, was missed. As the delays are a result of PIC not managing the move process effectively, they were liable for rental as of the 1st of Jan 2017. At this time, the CFO was negotiating with one of the directors of the Central Square Co-Ownership and directors of Menlyn Main Investment Holdings to conclude the final lease agreement, including the additional space that the CFO had now opted to take up in December 2016, that is, rather 2017. The Central Square Co-Ownership meeting minutes reflect how PIC was effectively excluded from the PIC corporate process and are in the file of information provided. As at the Central Square Co-Ownership meeting of 26 April 2017, PIC Property is still not aware of the lease terms agreed to in detail. And when I say PIC Property, I mean obviously then us as the GPF representatives within this development. The Menlyn Main Investments Holding Director involved with the negotiation with the CFO does, however, confirm to the meeting, and I quote, "The rental for the first 3 months, January to March 2017, has been recouped at an attractive interest rate." The exact details of this recouping were not shared, but given that it was recouped, the PIC Properties representatives on the Central Square Co-Ownership Board were comfortable that the correct action had been taken on behalf of our client, the GPF. The lease was subsequently, or in fact signed, on the 3rd of April 2017. Despite the occupation certificate for the office building being achieved on the 31st of March 2017, all employees reported to the new office on the 3rd of July 2017 for the first time. All of this, or all the while, this put the GPF at risk, who had in turn already committed to the FSB to provide space at Riverwalk to them by January 2016. It also resulted in a loss of turnover income for tenants in the centre below the offices at Menlyn Main, and so this also ended up as an indirect loss to the GPF. Point 4, how the fruitless and wasteful expenditure was buried. Given that PIC occupied the building 6 months later than they had originally contracted, double rental payments for the period of the 6 months should have been picked up for the period of January to June 2017. These payments should have been flagged as fruitless and wasteful expenditure, given that the delays resulting from the contractual obligation for PIC lay squarely at their own door. It is in relation to this fruitless and wasteful expenditure that my evidence relates. I knew all along that it had occurred, but it was unclear how exactly it was not flagged or seemed to have been missed. As part of this Commission's investigation, a copy of the final lease was provided to myself to review, given my intimate knowledge of the initial negotiations and the actual project and development, to try and identify why the potential finding of fruitless and wasteful expenditure was not made previously. Under 4.4 is a table that sets out the basic summary of the difference between the offer that was signed on the 10th of December 2015 and the actual lease which was signed on the 3rd of April 2017. I'd like the Commission to note that the content is commercially sensitive in terms of the detail, but what is significant if you look at the differences column is that you will note that the area occupied by PIC from the original approved area grew by 1,986 square meters. The rate that was paid that was agreed on the offer was 11 Rand and 67 cents more than the original offer. The balcony areas also grew by taking additional space. The parking area or the parking bays increased by 68 bays. And particularly noteworthy is that though the offer was signed at an escalation of 8%, the revised offer was at 8.38%. So based on the above, it can be assumed that the fruitless and wasteful expenditure directly related to moving in 6 months later than originally agreed translated to a minimum wasteful expenditure of just under 17 million Rand. For the period of January to March 2017, this was hidden by changing the occupation date from the 1st of January 2017 to the 1st of April 2017, while at the same time agreeing to a higher rate per square meter overall and a higher escalation rate. This meant that PIC did not make payment for the lost period specifically, and so you would not see a double rental as it is, but pays the Central Square co-ownership for the period of the lease, including interest, so as to disguise the actual payment. And it is this that the director previously referred to as the attractive interest rate. And so from a GPF perspective, the money was recovered, but from a corporate perspective, obviously, it was a PFMA issue. It should be noted that the amount set out above excludes the following additional amounts which relate to space never occupied since we moved into the building. That relates to more than 200 parking bays, to the tune of about 1.5 million Rand to date, as well as the additional area that was taken but never occupied, and which we are liable for to the tune of roughly 2.8 million Rand. The minimum wasteful expenditure therefore related to this lease and late move is at least 21 million Rand excluding VAT, and I round off these numbers. These amounts relate only to the actual lease agreement and do not take into account the possible costs related to the switching of the interior designers, the late design changes, which would also require further information to be able to quantify. So this is based purely on the lease numbers, not costs related to the fit-out. It is my understanding that the seriousness around these allegations could form the basis for criminal procedures in terms of the PFMA, and it is for this reason that I've been cautious to provide it until this time.
Mr. Schill, what is the position with the rental of the building that you previously occupied?
Mr. Libber, we occupied 2 buildings in the Riverwalk Office Park, and so the FSB did take the building that was owned by GPF, and we occupied another space within the adjacent property, which is owned by Atterbury, to my knowledge, and to my knowledge that lease expires at the end of this month.
So since the moving of the PIC to the new premises, have the PIC been paying rental for that building?
I would believe that would be the case, sir.
Mr. Commissioner, that concludes this part of the evidence on the movement to the new building. As agreed, we will proceed with the second part of his evidence relating to the HR matters tomorrow morning.
I just want to check one thing there. These delays, were they what one would call innocent delays, or, just, some negligence or whatever, or there could be something deeper than this?
Through yourself, Commissioner, in my personal opinion, these delays were completely avoidable. By the time Ms. Decker left, the operational plan for the move was effectively already in place. And that was, as we've mentioned, in May. So actioning of that plan just required somebody literally to do it. The teams involved in doing it were all specialists. To give you an idea, and we'll talk about it in another case, on a much smaller space, we were able to develop a fit out from scratch in about 8 weeks. So almost 8 months prior to the move should have been sufficient time to conclude a move like this.
But you are saying this was just normal, or what can I say? I'm trying to find a word, but I'm battling, Judge. Yeah, were these just normal things which could happen to any project and all that?
No, Chair, there was no special events or special issues related to this. It was related to the actual decision-making process. Somebody just needed to sign off plans, approve principles, and the evidence that I've handed in shows that the information was there. It was just a lack of decision-making that led to the delays.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner.
Okay.
Dank u, meneer. Goed dat u bent. Hulle verstaan alles mooi. Zet de leiding af. See you at 9:30. Okay. All right. Ek gaan vroeg hier wees.